Hi everybody, my name is Catherine Guerrero and I'm presenting for Accounting 250 in section W01. Today's date is December 2nd, 2023, and I will be presenting on chapter 13, pages 1 through 8. And those pages are going to cover the at-risk rules, liabilities for at-risk rules, and the carryover of disallowed losses. So we'll get into that a little bit. So again, what we're going to be covering today is first off, what activities are even subject to at-risk rules. We'll talk about what is at risk. We'll talk about an at-risk calculation. We'll talk about what form to use, the liabilities for at-risk purposes, what non-recourse debts are, and how the carryover of disallowed losses works. So, what activities are subject to at-risk rules? There's quite a few, but some examples are holding, producing, or distributing motion picture films or videotapes, farming, leasing any type of 1245 property, exploring for or exploiting oil and gas resources as a trade or business or for the production of income, and also exploring for or exploiting geothermal deposits. There is also a catch-all provision that you want to make sure that you take into account if you were to be doing at-risk activities. So the IRC, or the International Revenue Code, has a catch-all provision that causes any activity engaged in by the taxpayer in carrying on a trade or business or for the production of income to be subject to those at-risk rules. So you just want to make sure that, if you are doing some type of activity that is engaged by the taxpayer in the trade or business for the production of income, you can also be subject to those rules. So you might be wondering why this is important. At-risk rules prevent the taxpayers from deducting more than their actual stake in a business. So only the money that you're personally liable for is considered to be at risk and tax deductible. So you don't want to be overpaying essentially. So the money plus the adjusted basis of property contributed to the activity is at risk. And also the at-risk amount also includes certain amounts borrowed in connection with the activity. So who is subject to at-risk limitations? This is a good example. So if you have someone like Lisa here who's investing $30,000 for a 30% share in a business, and Lisa does not work at the business and is not liable for any of the business debt, she's just has a stake in the business. And then there's Jackie, who owns the other 70% share of the business, and she also personally contributes $30,000 to the business and borrows an additional $70,000 to put into the business. You kind of want to know who's subject to what. So Lisa is subject to an at-risk amount of $30,000 because that is all she can lose. Since she's not liable for any of the debt of the business, the only thing that is at risk is her initial personal investment of that $30,000. Lisa is subject to an at-risk amount of Jackie is subject to an at-risk amount of $100,000 because she can lose her initial personal contribution of that $30,000 as well as the $70,000 that she borrowed to put into the business. When does the at-risk amount increase or decrease? The at-risk amount increases each tax year by any income or gain items and any additional contributions of money or property, and the at-risk amount decreases each tax year by loss items and distributions of money or property. So factors that either increase or decrease the at-risk amount are considered prior to determining the amount of allowed loss items. So what is the at-risk calculation? This is what you would always want to follow when you are figuring out what your at-risk amount is. So you'd add cash contributions, property contributions, your share of liabilities, any income items, any gain items, and then you'd subtract cash distributions, property distributions, release of liabilities, which would give you your amount at risk, and then you would finally subtract any loss items, giving you your final ending at-risk amount. So this is a good calculator to use and follow for that. So what form to use? Of course, we always want to report any activity, so we would be using Form 1698 to report an activity that is subject to at-risk limitations, but the taxpayer is not required to file the form if the activity has net income or is not subject to at-risk limitations. So liabilities for at-risk purposes, there's 3 different categories. We have recourse, non-recourse, and qualified non-recourse. So a recourse liability is one in which the taxpayer is personally liable for the debt. A taxpayer's at-risk amount increases by their share of recourse debt. A non-recourse debt are loans in which no individual is personally liable for the debt, and they do not increase with those at-risk amounts. Now, next we have those qualified non-recourse debts. The qualified non-recourse financing applies to the activity of holding real property and consists of any debt that meets the following criteria, which would be that the taxpayer borrowed it with respect to the activity of holding real property, the taxpayer borrowed it from a qualified person or government, and no person is personally liable for repayment. The debt is also not convertible debt. So with the qualified non-recourse, the provision limited the effectiveness of the at-risk rules in reducing tax shelter abuses for real estate investments because most financial institutions aren't willing to finance business activities without a security. So borrowing for real estate ventures often meet requirements of qualified non-recourse financing because the financial institution requires the real estate to secure the loan, but may not require the individuals to be personally liable. So, I don't know. For example, with those, let's say you have 3 sisters that each invest $30,000 into a real estate venture. They borrowed $300,000 from a local bank and they purchased an apartment building for $360,000. The bank required that the apartment building secure the loan, but none of the partners or sisters were personally liable for repayment of the debt. So each sister's at-risk amount is going to be $130,000 because they all invested $30,000 personally, and then they're all responsible for a third of the bank loan, which would be $100,000. So 100 plus 30 is $130,000. So then we have the carryover of disallowed losses. Losses disallowed under the at-risk rules are carried over indefinitely. So the taxpayer can actually deduct the suspended losses in later years when the taxpayer's risk amount increases by income from the activities, cash or property contributions, or an increased share of recourse debt. So what that looks like is here. You can see this is a really good example. I stole this right out of the book to show you guys because it shows her yearly gains or losses on the left-hand side. And then it says that her beginning at-risk amount in 2018 was $25,000. So you can see because she had an initial loss of $30,000 and then she had the at-risk amount of $25,000 in the positive, she was allowed to carry over that $5,000 of disallowed allowance. The next year, she ended with another loss of $20,000, so she was able to add that to the $5,000 and then carry over $25,000 into the next year, where she had another loss of $10,000, so her carryover became $35,000. And then finally in 2021, she was in the green again, so then we would take that $20,000, subtract that, which is allowed, and subtract that from the carryover. So you would end up with $15,000 left at the carryover. And then again, she was in the green again. So we would subtract that $15,000 carryover to create an ending at-risk amount of $5,000. So if that was confusing, I apologize. But if you go through the numbers left to right, like it makes perfect sense. So I think this is a great example if you're having trouble understanding where the disallowed allowances are. So in conclusion, you want to see if the activities are subject to at-risk rules. You use the at-risk calculation, check if you need to file a form, and then check to see if there are any disallowed losses. Thank you guys for watching this, and I hope it was somewhat informative, and I can't wait to see what the rest of you guys produce. Thanks so much.